Hi guys, welcome back to my Steps to Sobriety, my show on YouTube and as a podcast with me, your host, Stefan Neff. Today is another fantastic day, another fantastic interview. I've got Nisha Mody with me. Nisha is a lady who has had her own challenges in her life and is here on my show to educate me about her unique way of healing, and especially her focus on social justice as part of healing. And that take on things intrigued me from the word go. So I'm dead excited to have Nisha here. Nisha, welcome to my show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, an absolute pleasure, absolute honor to have you here. Social justice, God, there's so much that we could do with that.
Yes.
And that is now completely unrelated to the sheer fact that in 3 days the civil war will break out in your country.
There's that.
Apart from that, hey, and the looting and the rioting that is sort of has become standard, at least as far as the international press is concerned, because that's here in New Zealand. How's America? Oh yeah, it's burning. Cool, fine, good. And I hope that the old adage is true. If it bleeds, it leads. In the news cycle, hopefully we only see a very distorted view of what is happening with you guys. But I mean, social justice is an issue, and I'm intrigued. How is that topic of social justice and healing linked in your story? How did it all start?
Sure, that's a great question. So I've been interested in social justice more and more over the past probably 10 to 12 years. I've always kind of had that idea that, everything should be equal. People should have equal access to things. But I also grew up as a daughter of Indian immigrants. I was born and raised in Chicago in the US. And I still had certain views based on things that my parents said, especially as being a South Asian immigrant or daughter of immigrants. A lot of Asian Americans are considered what they call like the model minority, where they're seen as, in terms of the hierarchical, like racial ladder, higher than people who are Black or Latinx. And I always kind of, I guess, believe this because that's kind of just what I grew up hearing, that, Asian Americans, they would be doctors and engineers, and it wasn't as common to see that in the Black and Latinx community. And I started realizing a little after college how problematic this was, because there are a lot of different stories to how we all as immigrants arrived in the United States. And a lot of that is, there are a lot of similar struggles in terms of oppression, in terms of discrimination, in terms of, just civil rights in general, and all of us being oppressed and blocked in some way from having equal rights. There are differences in how we came here and immigration patterns and laws and policies. And while I'm not an expert in the area, I do know enough that while Asians were blocked from coming to the United States for, I think, about 40, 50 years, when they were allowed to come in the mid 60s, they usually were trying to bring skilled workers, people that wanted to get their master's degrees. Like, for example, my father came to get his master's degree in engineering, where, the reason that the majority of Black people are in the United States is because of slavery. And in terms of Latinx, especially those from Mexico, they came as labor, and they still work as labor in farms and whatnot. And while there's been a lot of advancement in terms of, all races being in all different types of professions, there still is that origin story that affects people's perceptions of different races. And it also affects, how we treat each other. And one thing I always try to remind myself is that Asian American civil rights would not exist if it weren't for the African American civil rights movement in the 60s. They paved the way for Asian Americans to also fight that fight. And while there's this idea of the model minority, I think a lot of people need to understand that we wouldn't actually have a lot of the rights we have if it wasn't for Black people, starting that fight. So in terms of healing, it's, I think, really interesting because I see a lot of the challenges in my life very, very related to certain cultural norms within the South Asian community. And I can even dig deeper in terms of my religion, in terms of caste. Like, there's so many different intersections if you get deep. And then there's also patriarchy and sexism. And this has shaped me as who I am, and also shaped me through the lens of being a daughter of South Asian immigrants, specifically, who my parents worked extremely hard, and in working extremely hard, did not really think about mental health. Still, mental health, getting help from a therapist is very stigmatized within the community, because there's this, I think, sense of pride that, no, we work hard and we made it. Like, if we did it, why can't Black people do it? There's that mentality that is very misinformed, and I think problematic, because, we've all had our own struggles and we all have our own different stories. So where healing comes into that is, we need to kind of address these beliefs that we've had about ourselves, that we need to burn ourselves out and kill ourselves working, and to, like, quote unquote, succeed. I don't think success is just financial. I think it's emotional. I think it's trying to heal our lineage, our ancestry. It's looking at intergenerational trauma, how trauma is passed down from past generations. And I'm not just saying with my parents, I'm saying generations and generations before them. India was a colonized country, colonized by the British, and it wasn't, free until 1947. So, that wasn't really that long ago, just like the African-American civil rights movement wasn't really that long ago. It was just, my mom was born in 1947. So it's still within her lifetime, So I think that there are a lot of ties into how much people have been colonized, how much they've been oppressed or stolen or used for labor and not properly recognized, and, like, ultimately profiting, certain people. And that affects people's mental and emotional health. People want to look at, like, individual self-development and politics as separate. And I think they're extremely intertwined. So that's where I see the intersection of social justice and healing, because so much of it is also because of stories that we've been told that are informed by, gender constructs, racial constructs, economic constructs.
Makes all perfect sense what you're saying. And it is, there are so many challenges in what you have raised here. Challenges and facts and take on things. Where to start? I guess one of the things that I want to say is that throughout my studies in university, etc., I have met many immigrants that were studying with me, often first generation, second generation, so that their mums and dads came in fleeing from whatever system they left, and the children were powerhouses of a focus. I studied medicine in the University of Heidelberg, so quite a prestigious university. And we had, for example, a high Iranian contingent there, people who fled the Shah and then Khomeini. And it was, the typically girls that were top of the class were Iranian, were of immigrant background. So there is a positive side to that, because it creates that crystal clear focus, laser sharp, to say, look where we have come from, girl or boy, I never ever want you to be without options. So therefore, work your guts out, have 5 different passports to allow you to get anywhere, everywhere, or get out if you need to. So there is that positive spin on things, because I want to say that whatever youth we have gone through, whatever our parents have done, they probably have done it in their best intention. They
Definitely.
many of our parents are broken people themselves, yet, and they had never been in that situation before. So they had, whatever the situation was, they made it up as they went. And they made it up as they went at the time when there was no internet, when there was no easy access to information, when there was not social awareness, where there was not awareness of things you can do to improve yourself. So I feel actually at times, I feel really, really sorry for my parents and for the generations before us, because whilst we now observe everything with the youthful lens of, hey, here, this is how you do it. You know, I have done it. Why can't my parents have done it? And you actually think, damn, put yourself into their shoes, and suddenly there's a very different story coming out. And therefore, I applaud you. I commend you on actually raising that issue, because we keep forgetting that, especially the younger generations now. It is, it's quite amazing how natural it becomes for the next generation down there to tap into all the knowledge that they have got with social media, etc., and even consider me a dinosaur. My sons are 18 and 19, so just intergenerational going down. Damn. So, but I could talk for hours there. But I want you to talk for hours. Sorry.
No,
Nisha,
it's
so
great.
you developed this kind of understanding there. And the question though is, how did your healing then start? What were the triggers? Or may I ask, why did you need healing? What were the traumas that you experienced as a younger woman?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, my own journey with having and growing that compassion for my parents who were just trying to survive, where I now have a privilege of education and space to even think about these things, is something that I try to remind myself, because I used to just have more contempt in a lot of ways for my parents for not understanding things, you know. And growing up, even as a teenager, I was always very interested in like self-development and like happiness. How do you become happy? You know, even though, you know, there was, you know, I was always grateful. I never felt like there wasn't going to be food on my table, or I would never be clothed or anything like that. I was never worried that we wouldn't have a home. And I'm very grateful to my parents for always had that sense of security and stability. But at the same time, I still had a lot of like low self-worth, because I just kind of grew up in an environment where I was highly criticized. And my parents, especially my mother, were very perfectionistic. And again, a result of their own things, right? But her projecting it on me became very common, especially as I've an older brother, but as being a woman as well. And I kind of just grew up always being paralyzed when I had to start something, because if I wasn't going to start it perfect, then how could I start it? And I also kind of grew up in a family where I was the mediator in my family. Where if there was conflict within my family, I would be the one who either made a joke or tried to look at everyone's perspective and figure things out and fix things. And I just kind of grew into that role. So while I was always, and that kind of bled into my interest in self and people and development and how to, you know, become happy. But that has really evolved. I got into a relationship, a couple pretty toxic romantic relationships. One especially though was the marriage. You know, I was married and I'm now divorced, but that relationship was with someone who really emotionally abused me. He would gaslight me and make me feel like I was always doing something wrong. But I internalized it kind of as how I internalized things from my mother, where, well, she's just trying to tell me, you know, what I did wrong so I can be better. So I kind of did the same thing with him. But over the years, I just started realizing that there are better ways to approach giving constructive feedback to someone without like constantly insulting them or telling them that they're ridiculous or stupid or whatever. And that's a lot of what I got. And there was a lot of emotional abuse and a lot of substance abuse too within that relationship, where a lot of that stuff was prioritized over my needs. And I constantly adjusted to what he wanted, because if I did what made him happy, it would reduce conflict. And that's kind of also what I did growing up. So, and that adjusting, again, is something that is very socialized for me as being a woman, as also being an Indian woman, that I can't tell you how many conversations I still have with people in my mom's generation where they talk about how the girl has to adjust, like that's a very common word. And when I talk to my other South Asian friends about it, the women are always like, oh my God, like, it's just like such a common like feeling that they get, such a common response where it's like such frustration and, to this word that we have to constantly adjust. And that's what I did. And it basically, the relationship came to a point where I realized, okay, I'm going to actually take a step back and start putting Nisha's needs first. And I realized that when I did that, we just didn't work. Like the compatibility wasn't there. And I realized the only reason we were compatible was because I was constantly doing what he wanted. I was watching sports with him. I was, friends with his friends. He didn't like my friends. So I started spending less time with my friends, all this stuff to appease him. And once I didn't do that, I felt like our relationship was empty. And I realized that, what is as toxic as things were with him, I still have to be responsible for my actions or the fact that I adjusted. And I had to think about, where did this come from? This feeling that I need to adjust, this feeling that I need to pedestalize this man in this relationship. Why can't we be interdependent instead of me being codependent on him, and vice versa? I felt like we were very codependent on each other for validation. And I mean, things also came to a point where I realized when I really showed my power, he was threatened. And he even told me that once, that he's threatened by me, So for this to work, he had to push me down, and I had to accept that. And I just was like done with it, at a certain point where people have often told me how strong I was to leave the relationship, but I'll usually respond that I was too scared to stay in the relationship. It was more fear that if I continued to stay in this relationship, I was going to continue to erase and diminish myself. And I just wasn't okay with that anymore. I'd often said, like, at first I was too scared to leave the relationship because it still provided me the sense of security. And it almost fed into this toxic pattern that I had, nourished some way ever since I was younger, because I was just so used to it. That was literally how my body was used to responding. But then I was too scared to stay. It kind of just like, I've often said that I had one eye open in the relationship and then the other eye opened, and then there's no going back. Once I knew, it's just, I couldn't unsee it, essentially. So that started my journey for healing. I felt so liberated after I asked for a divorce. And I mean, I'm not saying it wasn't hard. It was hard to tell this person who I was in a relationship for 8 years that I'm done with it, but I also felt so free. And that freedom made me realize that, oh my God, there's so much more to life that I could do, And I got divorced in 2014, but it feels like lifetimes ago. I mean, it truly does, because I felt like a different person. I don't barely talk to the people and the friends that I used to talk to on his side. I realized that none of my friends ever liked him, but they just couldn't convince me, because I had just had my mindset. And I just, saw what I had lost, and but how wonderful those relationships were. And I just neglected them, as well as neglecting myself, most importantly. So, and then, I always kind of, I'm glad that you asked the question in the beginning, like, how is social justice and healing related? Because I don't think I quite got to that until the last couple of years, because I was always trying to find the connection, because I knew it was there, but I think it's that intergenerational trauma that and just, how things get passed down through epigenetics, like literally get passed down from generation to generation genetically. That kind of tied everything in together, because I started learning through various books and talking to different coaches and therapists, which is another thing. Like right when I realized, I wanted to divorce my husband, I realized that I needed to start seeing a therapist, that I needed some help to talk this through. I started seeing how trauma literally lives in your body, and your body actually reacts, and how we react or try to fight someone or get into that fight or flight or freeze state is very directly related to very early experiences we have with others. And I started reflecting about how those experiences and ways I would react to my ex-husband or stand down to him was very similar to how I did when I was much younger. And that dynamic just repeated itself in a different relationship, and I needed to do something to change that story, to write a new story for myself. And so I started doing that through therapy, but I also actually started literally doing it through writing, and through writing essays about my experiences in this relationship. And I found so much healing through writing and through expressing myself that way. I enjoy speaking, but writing, it provided me a different space, almost to edit myself, but like edit myself was also a way of healing myself, it allowed me to explore different senses. It wasn't just about what I saw, it was about what I felt, about like, I started realizing, when I would be in certain interactions with my ex-husband and my mother, and even my brother and my father, how would my body react? Like suddenly I would start sweating, or I felt really hot, and I was able to write that down and just experience it more fully. And so that really, really, kind of just started bringing things together for me. And I basically went from there, and I started just getting more into this realm. And the more I wrote, the more people reached out to me expressing how they've had similar experiences and how they're so grateful that I told my story. And not only was that validating for me in terms of, just my writing ability and just getting that validation and compliments, because who doesn't like that? But it just made me glad that like, I'm not alone and others can heal because I'm putting something out there in the world. And what if they put something out there in the world? They can heal more, I just found this like great like domino effect from sharing my story and sharing these struggles that I have had and, continue to have. And I think that's the thing about healing. It's not linear. There's times I still, realize I get back to certain patterns that are harmful, but now I have this awareness of it. And now, like I said before, I can be like radically responsible for myself and for the power that I have. Because, regardless, one thing I often think about my ex-husband is that hurt people. And I know that there are many ways that he has been hurt. And I hope for everyone in his life and for himself that he could find that peace and he could find his own healing. But at the same time, he did hurt me, so, and how that also affects me is that because I've been hurt, I could potentially unleash that on other people myself. So I have that responsibility to be aware of my own reactions so I don't harm other people because I've been harmed, and I think we all have that responsibility to increase that awareness of our own patterns and where they come from, our personality, but also from our upbringing, which could also be informed by, things that are more politicized and other histories in terms of immigration history or, people that are refugees, et cetera. So much of it is, passed down and informed through those stories.
So true. May I ask, your ex-husband, was he equally Indian, of Indian origin?
Yes, yeah, I forgot to mention that he was Indian and from the same state as my parents grew up. And one thing
was it an arranged marriage or was it?
No,
did you meet?
We met on like I just saw it still exists. It's called indiandating.com. So I think it was in like 2005 that we met on a website. Yeah. So we met each other. Like I said, I grew up in the Chicagoland area. He did too. And our parents like spoke the same language. And I did want that. Like I wanted to be with an Indian person who understood, things culturally. And, it was really nice. Though since that relationship, I haven't been as concerned about having that, because I realized that I'd rather just have a relationship with someone, Indian or not, that has that respect for me and gives me space to do what I want to do and encourages me to do that instead of puts me down for it. So however that might look is however that might look, because I think when there's that interdependence is there and communication channels are open, then it can work. And I have found that with someone, and I'm very, very grateful for that. And he isn't Indian, but I have also feel like I've been able to share so much of my history, and we learn from each other. And I think that's also so beautiful. Yeah. And also, one thing I completely forgot to mention is that right before I separated from my husband, my father died. And very unexpectedly, we were all on vacation in India, actually, and he got sick, and it just started spiraling down. And within a week of him entering the hospital, he passed away. And I think that's significant in that, within a year, I lost two of the most important male figures in my life, my father and my husband. And in a way, while I felt liberated from leaving my husband, like my father's death was obviously much harder for me emotionally, but I've been able to also reflect on those patriarchal structures and what they meant to me and how they affected me. And there's a lot of things actually about my father that I only realized after he's been gone for 8 years, and in the wake of his death, about the purpose he served in my life and how it's also affected the romantic partners I choose. So it's not just my mom. Obviously, it's going to be everyone in your family and in your background that informs that.
And it's such a web of influences that if you want to tease one string of that web out, it's virtually impossible because they are all interlinked. And it is, you start toppling one thing and suddenly the whole thing moves, and a set of dominoes comes sort of in mind. But it is a journey that is really, really powerful and really, really important that you do it, that you can try to tease apart why you respond in a certain way. And that is completely irrelevant what color of skin you have, what is your background, etc.
Mm-hmm.
It is why are you getting angry with someone who just said something, and you could rip his head off and you think, where's that coming from?
Yeah.
And then you think back, and actually it relates probably to something that happens when you were 5 years old, and the way someone made you feel then, and you have got that superior trigger mechanism there that is, a hair trigger, literally click, boom.
That's all you need.
Well, exactly. And that's so important that we actually realize that regardless who we are, because 80% of our actions are determined by our reptilian brain. We don't have the time to think before these reactions happen. And the only way that you can deal with that is with awareness, with mindfulness, with acceptance that this is a fact, that you are very much determined by events that happened actually a long time ago and that you might not even recall. But it is so important that we actually, all of us, go on this journey and see what truly makes us tick, what truly makes us the people who we are now. Complex, broken, sinners, saints at the same time. We are all the same. We are all this mess inside. And it is so beautiful if something rattles our cage and we start going on this journey. And in your case, it set in motion a series of events that essentially led you to now being this very different woman compared with the girl that sought marriage and maybe was trying to comply with the expectations of her parents, of her social background, etc. because we are people pleasers, many of us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say the vast majority of guests that come onto my show are people pleasers, because that's one of the critical things, that we always want to be there for others. We always put ourselves last. Everything else comes first.
Mm-hmm.
And we're setting ourselves up to fail. And then it's not so uncommon that people then end up seeking refuge in not so nice coping mechanisms, such as the alcohol, such as the drugs, the gambling, pornography, eating disorders, all these kind of things that take away the pain and maybe give us that little bit of refuge, however false it is. Did you fall into that pitfall? I certainly
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm glad you brought up people pleasing, because that's kind of when I was talking about adjusting, that's exactly what it was. I would adjust because when I would adjust, it would make the other person happy and it would validate me as a human being. And if they were happy, then I felt good, because I was basically taught that that's what I needed to do. And I think that's something that is, I'm not a parent, but I think that's something that's challenging about parenting, is that, demanding obedience from kids. I think obedience is different than like a mutual respect for each other. And I'm not saying that's easy. I don't think parenting's easy at all, but I felt like I was taught obedience. I was taught that if I asked why, like, I need to shut up, like, don't ask why. It's because I said so, So, you feel like you don't have power. So what I do have power is to do something to make you happy. And if then you accept me, then great. And I started realizing that I would start saying yes. When I would say yes to people, I would often be saying no to myself. And by saying no to myself, that means I didn't have any worth, So I'm very careful now. If I'm saying yes to someone, am I taking something away from myself for any decision I make, no matter how small, because it really allows me to have that awareness for how much I'm adjusting versus compromising. I think that it could be different. I feel like compromise has more of an equal exchange, right? There's from both ends, and there's that open discussion. But adjusting means that I'm just going to adjust, and I'm just going to do whatever, it takes to make you happy. And that was very similar for my relationship with my mom and with my relationship with my husband. And, one thing that I prided when I was young was that I was very successful academically. So getting good grades was another thing for me that I would be so upset if I didn't get a good grade, because one, it's that perfectionistic part of me. And two, that was like the one thing that I had for myself was my academic achievement. So if I didn't do good in that, like, I really didn't know what else I had. I didn't feel like I was that great in sports. Like I had done some musical things, but it just wasn't my thing. So this was my bread and butter. So if I couldn't do that, I didn't know what worth I had. And, that still follows me, to be honest. Like I do find myself still kind of wanting that ego boost, but I realize that that isn't everything, and that there's so much more to my worth than just that.
I'm laughing because you just spoke out of my soul. No, honestly, I validated myself exactly in the same way. There was very poor self-worth, very poor. I had a very low self-esteem as a youngster, and my stepfather, actually, one day said, "Hey, look, every time you're best in class in a test, I give you $5. Every time you're second best, you get $2, and anything thereafter, now forget it."
Yeah.
And up until that point, I was quite mediocre, to say the least. I guess I made my own expectations come true. And suddenly I applied myself, and within no time was I best at class in virtually everything. And very quickly there was a bill of $100 or so that I said, "Come on," and my stepfather said, "I actually don't have that money. You completely surprised me here." But that didn't matter anymore. I suddenly had this validation that I had never received in any other way. And I was suddenly feeling good about myself. And I remember, actually, it's weird, now that I think back at when I was 12, somewhere at that, I remember that rush of dopamine and adrenaline, of feeling good about myself, nearly in the same way that a glass of wine later on would give me
Mm.
the same rush. So that's intriguing to have that insight. Um, Bloody hell, guys. So if you ever wonder what you should do in your spare time, you already got two things that comes out of this interview here. Number one is journaling and writing essays, because
Mm-hmm.
that's what helped Nisha, and that's certainly again through my life has been an interesting journey. And secondly, why not host a show? Because suddenly you expect to bring information out of your guests.
Mm-hmm.
Inevitably, in every single bloody interview I run, suddenly there's this
Mm-hmm.
moment where suddenly something clicks. Why do I say that? I say that not because I want to encourage you to do a show, unless, of course, you want to. I say that because talking to someone about these very powerful emotions and things that are happening well below the surface is so important. And that's exactly where the role of a life coach comes in. That's where the role of a psychologist comes in, of a counselor, mentor, sponsor, whatever the setting is. You talk about things, and suddenly, by you either writing them down, talking about them, having a discussion over a coffee, you suddenly get that moment. And that's so
Yeah.
powerful. That's so powerful, because you're lifting things out of the murkiness of your brainstem, and suddenly it becomes clear, and suddenly you get this insight, and you think, no surprise that I always respond this way when that happens. So, and
Yeah.
that's so beautiful. When you started realizing that this relationship was on the fritz, that you literally had to move forward, however painful it would be, you sought counseling.
Mhm.
Was it a counselor? Was it a life coach? Who did help you?
Sure. I started seeing a therapist. So it was someone who, went to school and whatnot for it. But the funny thing is, I actually do coaching as well. But I've also gotten a lot of coaching from other coaches. And it's actually been in this last year working with coaches that I feel like I've really made breakthroughs regarding this trauma and what you were talking about with like the reptilian brain, understanding how things are stored and how we react and what the actual like neuroscience is about it and how the nervous system is attached to it has been like mind blowing for me and so helpful. So with that being said, like standard talk therapy was also very helpful because it just helps to get it out, and I'm not even sure if I mentioned this, but I do have a podcast and where I talk to other Asian people from Asian backgrounds and talk about how their story of migration informs the work that they do. And so often this comes up too. Lots of things around people pleasing, lots of things about making your parents happy, being obedient. So, and that those connections with people, relating that back to the nervous system, it provides not just validation, but it provides that feeling of co-regulation where you feel safe with someone because you're having that connection. And because we're humans, we're social beings, we are meant to be connected with other people through common experiences, through touch, all these things that I think people are realizing more and more now with the pandemic when we are now not able to do those things, right? Or at least not as much. We're more restricted from doing it. And I was joking with someone the other day that I'm like, oh my God, just can't wait till I could be in some crowded room where I'm like bumping into someone else's sweat or like at a concert. Like I like things that would be so annoying before that I'm like, oh, I like crave it because it's so helpful, like just to have that human touch, and so even in these conversations, it's like we get these like really nice, happy feelings within us because we're having these common experiences and connections where we're helping each other. And so often I think society and societal norms And capitalism honestly makes us feel like we have to work, and do everything on our own and succeed. But it's actually through collaboration and through altruism that we really connect and feel joy, you know? And when I really think about things in my life, and I think about those happy moments, and it's usually things that are connected with somebody else, you know, like when someone made me laugh, when my dad said this one thing to me, things that I'm realizing more and more now that he's gone, like those are the emotionally latent moments that are sticking in my heart and my mind, you know? And those are the things that I think are so, so important, and we can have without being necessarily in a toxic, codependent, people-pleasing relationship. It's possible, but it really does take that work and that emotional and mental awareness to get there.
And I think that awareness is so important to be able to step outside of yourself and look what is really going on. I think that was the biggest breakthrough ever in my life in rehab, when I learned to press the pause button and step outside of myself. And the first time that happened, it was literally like an out-of-body experience. And it was spooky and it was strange. But suddenly I could observe my own reaction to something my wife had said, and which normally would have triggered a third world war in between amongst the two of us. And suddenly I didn't say a word, and it was bizarre. It was just bizarre. And I cherished that moment when it manifested like a miracle, literally, because from then on, I sought that happening again and again. And I learned to trigger that myself, to actually recognize that wave of anger or resentment or sadness, something washing over me, and these kind of things, rather than following emotionally through and whatever emotion it is. I've learned to recognize, whoa, there's a wave coming. Stop. What is happening? Where is it coming from? What is really happening? And that has been the most beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. So, guys out there, please, please, please try to develop that mindfulness. And our words sometimes can sound so corny and so cliched, but it is that beautiful insight of how our deep subconscious mind drives us in virtually everything we are doing. And once you make that connection, once you accept that and learn how to observe it and then make adjustments, because you still get the same waves coming through. You can't just now say, wow, I'm mindful, therefore this wave will not happen again. Nice try. Yeah. You still get triggered. You still have the same thoughts or the same pathological weird links happening. Yeah. But you can start recognizing them to say, well, actually, thank you very much for that wave, but I don't think that suits me right now. I don't think it would be so good to rip this patient's head off and tell him really what I think about him. No, I don't think as a doctor I would be a bit in trouble there, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, he deserves it because he's an asshole. But no, don't do it. So it's these kind of things. So I'll give you one example. And the other thing I want to say, though, is yes, there is often, we are quite broken and we are quite messed up in our head. But don't forget that other people out there, they are broken people too, most of us. But there are some people who are really, really not so nice. So the 10% of people with personality disorders, the 1% of the population, 1 in 100, that are sociopaths and psychopaths. So, guys, it is not necessarily always your fault that you're triggered. Okay, so but it's good to be able to tease that apart, isn't it? And Nisha, I'm so grateful that you came on today, because you actually highlighted this complex web of things that drive us nowadays, and so many factors that many of us don't actually consciously recognize and realize, yet they are driving them. You were pointing out to the social factors and your background. It would be interesting to actually see what your DNA test really shows. Have you ever done one?
No, I haven't actually. I've been curious about it, but I feel like usually those are those like ancestry ones where I'm like,
Right.
well, I know, but like, I don't know. I mean, there's still a lot of like anglicized influence within India that's probably part in my blood, and I just don't know it, you know? So
exactly. You might be
definitely
amazed. As far as I was concerned, if I was the boss of a country, I would make everyone, absolutely everyone, make them do a DNA test. And the reason I say that is, there are people out there who are so, I am whatever group they like to be in. And chances are they're not. No. So I thought I'm German through and through. What else can I be? Oh yeah, my DNA test rather gave me some surprises there where I thought, okay, who played with grandma? And yeah, exactly. So, and that's beautiful, because if a war was to break out, I look at my DNA test and I said, well, who the hell shall I fight for? I'm sitting in both camps here, at least from a genetic background. So I can't say I'm German, therefore I will be whatever. No, it doesn't work like that. So therefore, it's quite intriguing to open that door. So if you open Pandora's box of looking into your background and say, well, okay, there are the influences that drove me from my Indian heritage point of view, it might be interesting to then say, actually, all intriguing. Yes, Indian heritage, by the way, that's only 79%. 21% is ta-da!
Right. No, definitely. It would be interesting.
Just a thought. The other thing I want to say here on this show, Nisha doesn't know it yet, but she will write a book.
Yes.
Yes, she will. Yes, she will. She has written all these essays, and I can't wait to read that book. Come on, put them together and teach us all, because you have got a very important voice there that I think many people of various immigration backgrounds want to hear and want to read. Tell us, in the interim, whilst we can't yet read your book, where can they find your podcast? What is the name of your podcast?
Yeah, my podcast is called Migrations. So it's Migracians. So it's kind of like a play on migrations with Asians. And it's on all of the major, podcast apps. So you could find that. I just recorded my first season, so that's done. And I plan to start next season with more of a focus actually on healing stories amongst Asian immigrants. So that's one place. And you can also follow me on Instagram. My handle is at Healing Hype Girl. That's kind of what I call myself. I'm all about like hyping people up about healing, because I think it's so important and it's so powerful. Yeah.
And you were saying that you're a life coach yourself. So how can people find you in that capacity?
Yeah, I do a lot of content on my Instagram, so that's a good place. But my website is www.nishaland.com. So you could find me there, and you could look at what services I have, which I'll be changing some things up soon, but you could just stay tuned. It's probably also a good idea to get on my email list, which you can get on through my website as well, because I provide the latest updates there for my coaching services and other offerings. So yeah.
Brilliant. Nisha, I'm so grateful that you came onto my show. I was looking forward to that, and it is lovely to shine the spotlight onto those deep hidden links that are so important, that drive us in the background. So thank you so much for coming onto my show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. You guys out there, look after yourself. I hope we've planted a few seeds for you to reevaluate your own life, your own relationships, your own background. And I wish you a fantastic time until the next interview. Look after yourself. Bye.
Bye.
Dream on, dream